So this is an adaptation of a talk that I gave at Harvard when I was invited up there by Dr. Sweeney. I named it Down the Rabbit Hole, My Foray into the World of Data Breaches, Security, and Privacy. And I will be announcing a fresh new breach that I haven't told anybody about except for the company behind it. They have secured it already, so feel free to tell anybody you want about it. That'll be in a couple of slides. Who am I? And I don't know why the font added a little music note there, but you know, that's just a fun little change. I'm Chris Vickery, a 31-year-old native of Austin, Texas. Day job is, as you were told, I work as IT support at a prominent law firm. The law firm themselves don't want themselves mentioned because they want none of my antics. By night, I'm a data breach hunter, security and privacy enthusiast. I've been cited as a security expert by Forbes, the New York Times, BBC, Wired, CNET, and dozens of other publications. Some examples of stuff that I found, the entire US voter registration database, that was 191 million records of names, addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth. A lot of states, that's not supposed to be out there. Some states, they don't really care, but you know, it made a bit of a splash when I found that one. Sistema Software is a migration, they had a migration archive server that had 1.5 million records, including social security numbers, names, diagnoses, all sorts of investigation records on how they were going to try to not pay out claims and how they were going to investigate various incidences, stuff that absolutely should not be public, but was in a database with no password or username. The Hello Kitty fan account database, it had 3.3 million, mostly children's accounts, email addresses, hash passwords, although they were not using a strong hashing method. An escrow firm database that had over $3.5 million in transferable funds sitting in an open, unprotected database that I could have theoretically figured out a way to transfer to any bank account that I wanted to. The Council on American Islamic Relations donor database, which I figured our intelligence agencies might be interested in. I thought I might get a call from one of them at some point. They had plain text credit card details, as in name, CVV number, you know, card number, everything a fraudster would need to commit, you know, acts of fraud. And then another interesting one was the Microsoft Careers database, not because it had a whole bunch of juicy information, but because Microsoft was taking this database and the HTML in it and using it directly on their site, meaning I could have altered Microsoft's website by changing the HTML code in this database. I'm actually one of Microsoft's researchers of the year on their Hall of Fame or something or other. If you look it up, they granted me a free license to their MSDN database people, something or other. I don't know. I didn't really pay attention to it. So here's the fresh breach. Surescripts. They were working with somebody called Jefferson Technical to develop some sort of new portal, and Jefferson Technical didn't put any password on the database they were developing, and Surescripts gave them 62,000 records. This is what it looked like. Patient, identification, name, gender, address, communication number, social security number, everything, 62,000 of these just sitting there. I notified them on June 1st. It was taken offline the same day. Surescripts' IT department is hoping that the records are fictitious. I'm currently waiting to hear back from them. Something I want to point out to you is everybody claims that the records are fictitious at first. That's the common result or common response that I get. Everybody says that. I don't know if there's a law firm out there that's telling people that, hey, if you have a database that gets discovered, claim it's all fake, because that's what everybody claims. But in almost every single case, it turns out to not be the truth. I have not yet announced this to anybody in the media. It'll probably be my next post that I do for the company that I post data breaches about. Here's how I got started, really, with Amazon AWS buckets. This is what they look like. Example.s3.amazonaws.com. The S3 part is always the same for every bucket. The example is what changes. In early September of 2015, I stumbled upon a simple one at sys-prod.s3.amazon.aws.com. And this is how it played out. IT specialist finds unsecured medical info of 1.5 million. It was the Sistema Software Company's migration archive database. It included the state of Kansas workers' compensation database, that was 1 million entries, and the California State Association, blah, 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 Excess Insurance Authority. Miller's Mutual Group, York Insurance, Salt Lake County, that was about 500,000 entries. It included things like social security number, date of birth, address, employer, medical history, investigation, litigation notes. I called Kansas first. The database went offline about 30 minutes later. A room full of Kansas attorneys called me back while I was at work at my day job, and I slipped into a side office and talked to them because it was a room full of attorneys. The end of the call ended with this. Now, Chris, there's no reason anyone else has to know about this. Except I've always been taught by my father that when somebody says that to you, that's the exact moment you need to start telling people about it. So here's the next part of it. I left work at 5 o'clock that day. My cell phone started ringing at 5:04. It was Sistema's chief operating officer because Kansas had given him my phone number. The COO tries to convince me not to contact any more clients because the database has all their clients listed. That's how I figured out that Kansas was one of them. Over the next day, I notified a few more because I was not going to shut up and let this slide under the rug. The COO calls me again, really, really wanting me to not contact any more clients. Says that they've all been notified, which I later found out was not true. And how could it be? There were hundreds and hundreds of entities listed in this database. I don't know how he could contact them all in one day unless he sent out a mass email, which he didn't do. A week later, I had not seen a single breach notification online in any publications. I hadn't heard anybody talking about it on Twitter or anything, and there's so much data in my hands. So I start contacting the media, and I get some government responses. I start emailing details of the breach to online news sites. A few hours later, the Texas Attorney General's office calls me. They know I've been contacting media outlets. I don't know how they knew that I'd been contacting media outlets, but they knew. The AG's office wants my hard drive immediately. They wanted it, as they put it, yesterday. They issued a civil investigative demand for the data. The civil investigative demand, you're supposed to have 2 weeks to respond to it. They gave me 1 day. I don't know if I'd have made a fuss, if I would have gotten anywhere, but I decided not to fight it. The following evening, I spent an hour and a half meeting with them, negotiating an affidavit saying, no, I didn't make any copies of this, no, I didn't hand it to anybody else. The Kansas attorneys had wanted to fly down for that interview. The Texas AG's office told them to hold off. And in the future, I don't know why that's shaking there. Through the Public Information Act in Texas, requested some information regarding this investigation, and they denied my request, citing that they anticipate litigation against Sistema. So that's good. I like that. Here's my legal theory behind how I can stay safe when I do these things. When I find databases that have no password, yet I go into them and copy the data. Some people say that, doesn't that expose you to liability? Well, here's what I think. Country roads are public roads that, even if they're not often traveled, if a company places sensitive documents on the side of a country road, there's a chance that no one will drive by and see it. However, I make a habit of driving down the internet's country roads. It turns out that lots of companies put sensitive documents on the roadside. Here's a case that backs up my legal theory. Travelers Indemnity Company versus Portal Healthcare. The judge said, exposing confidential medical records to online searching is publication. Publication does not hinge on the would-be publisher's intent, which is very important to me because a lot of companies say, hey, I didn't want to put it out there, so it doesn't count as being on a publicly accessible location. Well, you kind of did put it out there, so it doesn't matter what your intention was. This was upheld by the Fourth Circuit in April of this year. It's only binding in Virginia and places in the Fourth Circuit, not in Texas where I am, but hey, I can lean on it and say, hey, at least one judge agrees with me. That is Judge Gerald Bruce Lee. He basically makes the point here that if a book is on Barnes & Noble's shelf, it is published. Whether or not somebody takes it off that shelf makes no difference whatsoever. Things start heating up after I find the system of breach. I began to use Shodan.io and Zoomai.org, as well as some tools like MathScan and ZMap to find these databases that have no passwords, no usernames, and are just out there and available. I learned that many NoSQL implementations can be configured for public access without any form of authentication. These are some examples of those types of software. Statistically, this is a data breach storm waiting to happen, because if you can make a database with no password, a certain percentage of people are going to do that, whether or not it's a smart thing to do. So here's a health data breach that, well, kind of health related. There were weights and workout routines and heart rate data in here, but it's for a company called iFit. They are a competitor to Fitbit. They had 576,274 user profiles exposed. This included passwords, email accounts, as well as how much people weigh, how often they work out, things of that sort. At first, they claimed it's a several years old test database, as everybody claims. Oh, it's fake data, it's test data, it's old, blah, blah, blah. I called their bluff. They later admit that it is a database in a test environment, but with real data. That still doesn't make it better. It doesn't matter if it's a test database. If you put real people's data in it, it might as well be a production database. Here's a dating app for HIV positive adults called Hzone. They had a database, no password protection, no username, no nothing, just sitting out there. Nearly 5,000 users exposed with email addresses, GPS coordinates, sexual preferences, private messages. I worked with the admin at databreaches.net to contact Hzone's owners. The Hzone CEO threatened to infect the databreaches.net administrator with HIV for disclosing this. He's a guy in China somewhere, I don't know his name, but he is the owner and operator of Hzone, and he threatened to infect her with HIV. Here's one that isn't necessarily health related, but it did have social security numbers and sensitive stuff, so I decided to include it here. The California Virtual Academies is a series of K-12 charter schools in California. They had 59,000 student records exposed. Grades, special education status, therapy notes on whether a special ed kid is doing good or bad or what he needs to do differently. They also had payroll files on 17,000 employees, social security numbers, pay rates, hashed passwords. Surprisingly, I was recently contacted by an attorney of theirs to verify that all data was securely wiped, and that was good follow-up. Normally, I never hear from them again. After they secure the database, it just, they never contact me. They never say, hey, delete our data, or hey, did you download a copy? I always let them know that I did, but very few of them, when I find a database, actually ask me to purge it, which is surprising. Alliance Health, they were a pretty big one. They operate a series of condition-specific medical support communities for people with diabetes, arthritis, depression, etc. According to their IT guy that I talked to, he kind of gave me an inside scoop. They mine the user data when people sign up for this stuff and supply it to call centers, and then push condition-related products through emails and phone calls. Needles and blood testing supplies to diabetics would be an example of that. The data mined records with defects, such as an ill-formatted phone number or a date of birth that indicated a minor, were placed in a database table called scrubbed leads, leads that they couldn't follow up on for one reason or another. Not that the entire entry was wrong, but one little piece of it was. Apparently, no one ever cleared out the scrubbed leads table. It had accumulated over 1.5 million records with names, phone numbers, dates of birth, and email addresses, as well as insurance carrier and medical condition notes, just sitting out here on the open internet for anybody. They quickly responded, and they're complying with notification laws. Since I wrote this presentation and originally presented it at Harvard, they have contacted me and gotten me to, write an affidavit saying, yes, I securely purged all this stuff. So they're one of the good guys. Not that it was good that this information was originally out there, but it's good that they've been cleaning up their act. AARP, this one was interesting. Everybody knows who AARP is, the American Association of Retired Persons. They had nearly 1.5 million accounts of people registered through their Life Reimagined portal, which is a side project of theirs. They ignored me. I waited a week, went to the media. An article was posted on securityweek.com 9 days after my notification to AARP. I was contacted by AARP's security group the same day the article went up. To my knowledge, no breach notification went out to users, and AARP never commented publicly. However, I was later contacted anonymously via Reddit by a supposed insider urging me to make a bigger deal out of the breach. He alleged that AARP had conspired to cover it up, and he knew things, he or she, I don't know if it was a man or a woman, he knew things about the breach that I had never told the media. So I am going to believe them unless they hacked into my computer and learned those things. Here's the big one, the U.S. voter registration database, 191 million records. In many jurisdictions, it's considered public info, but many exceptions as well. To this day, the faulty party is not known for sure. The prime suspect is Pioneer Solutions Incorporated and United in Purpose. They're headed by the same guy, a felon named Bill Dallas. He's an ex-San Quentin inmate convicted of embezzlement in the 90s. According to tax filings, United in Purpose paid Pioneer Solutions over $1 million in 2012 and 2013 for Pioneer data, which we believe is this voter registration data. The registered usernames in the database were Pioneer and Pioneer 2. That's one of the ways that we were putting the owner of the database together. We haven't gotten a flat-out admission from Pioneer Solutions, but all the arrows are indicating them. 3 Lockbox was an interesting breach. That's the one that is an escrow company primarily dealing with large construction projects, some of which are public schools, some of which are malls. Their exposed database had over $3.5 million in dispersible funds. They had plain text passwords for about half of the account. Plain text means it's not encoded in any way. Upon notification, the admin requested a week before reporting to media. I said, okay, I can give you that. There was a minor misunderstanding though. He thought that he was asking for a week to secure the database. I expect the databases, when I find these things, to be secured immediately. I'll wait a week to tell the media, but you're not going to get a week for it to sit out there in the public. So when I discovered at 2 a.m. on Christmas morning, when I woke up randomly and checked on it, that it was still exposed, I called the CEO. And guess how I found his home phone number? The voter database that I had found just a week earlier. The database was secured 30 minutes later at 2 a.m. on Christmas morning when the CEO heard that he had $3.5 million waiting to be stolen. And here's one that went bad. Most of these breaches I get good responses for. Some of them, the responses are a little neutral, and then every once in a while you get one that responds badly. This is probably the worst response I've ever gotten. Kids is a child tracking app. The breach that I discovered with Kids exposed, less than 2,000 children, but still, children are children. You don't want them to be exposed at all. GPS coordinates, social media logs, authentication tokens, and over 6.8 million text messages and 2 million images. The CEO quickly went from appreciative to intimidating to accusatory. And this is what he posted on his Kids blog. A database was breached by a hacker, and here are the facts as we know them now, where he goes on to lambast me and call me evil and the devil and everything you can imagine. Here's the fallout from that. Articles such as Chris Vickery under attack after disclosing OpenDB for Kids, goes on attack after database found insecure, child tracker firm in Hack Row, responds the worst possible way, and takes aim at security researcher after database breach. Here are some thoughts that I've had that are related to that. I've assisted with investigations conducted by the FBI, the Texas Attorney General's Office, Secret Service, State of Kansas, California Highway Patrol, and others. Not a single agency has even suggested that what I do is criminal. Here's the alternative if you want to subscribe to the CEO of Kids' theory that I shouldn't be doing this. You have the example of on December 9th, I discovered a database that belonged to battlefy.com. It's a site that has to do with e-gaming. 89,000 usernames, email addresses, passwords. I classified it as something I need to notify them about, but not something immediate like private health information. I added it to my backlog of breaches. Here on January 11th, 2016, however, there was an actual admitted hacker that hit the esports site Battlefy and released 89,000 users' data. Basically, he found the same database that I found and released it to the world. He didn't try to notify Battlefy, he didn't try to notify the users, he didn't protect it at all. He just released it to everybody. And it made a bunch of headlines because then these email addresses can be used for phishing, the passwords can be cracked and broken into other sites. Basically really nasty stuff that if I had notified them, which I had, ahead of time, this wouldn't have happened. Which one would you rather have? And that's pretty much the end of the presentation here. I think I cut it down to size. I guess we can take questions or...
Yeah, well, first we should give you We do have time, I think, for a couple of questions. Yeah.
Dr. Sweeney, 3 years ago was the last time I came, and I was so inspired by your talk and what Jordan Robertson wrote about, and came to look at Oregon in terms of what they were doing and with data. And one of the things that was really bothersome to me is that just in 2010 they created legislation to start an all-payer, all-claims database. And so they chose a vendor to store the data, to de-identify the data, to do all the stuff, and then do analytics and whatnot. And the vendor that they happened to choose was Milliman Incorporated, one of the top purchasers of medical data, and who in 2008 was hand-slapped by the Federal Trade Commission in terms of other things that they were doing. My question for you, because I am really trying to look at this issue and think about all these all-payer, all-claims databases, which the Supreme Court has said that self-insured plans don't have to submit information to, partly because it's an ERISA plan, and there are risks associated with it. And I've tried to pull my data, I've asked them to take my data out and gotten nowhere with it. And, but there's another basic question as to when we look at these big data aggregators that are, that a state says is mandated data, is there a way to discriminate conflicts of interest whereby, this company which has so many clients, they do rate filings, they work with PBMs, they work with hospitals, that they should be excluded because the vendors for all-payer, all-claims databases are defense contractors, all sorts of people. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So first of all, I'm required to say that anything I say has nothing to do with the Federal Trade Commission. I don't get to speak for them. I don't even work for them anymore. But all-payer databases are a real problem because unlike the hospital discharge data, they're even more hidden. So we can't do a FOIA request against them. They may be selling or selling or giving away the data, but they don't necessarily have to sell it or give it to us. And so it's ironic that the new version of discharge data, it's all the same as discharge data plus more because it includes clinical notes and lab measurements and things like that. It's far more precarious.
I want to add a comment to this because Attorney General's offices were mentioned prominently and all-payer claims databases. In Massachusetts, we have a law, Chapter 224, that gives patients access to what information the state has collected in the all-payer claims database. And for over 3 years now, I've tried to get enforcement of that law to give patients this information, because it's immensely useful in choosing which health plan you want to use in the health insurance exchange, which one you want to select, because it gives you objective information about what your out-of-pocket costs would have been. The Attorney General's office does not habitually go and enforce the law relative to other state agencies. Is basically, they tell me that it's too complicated, that's not really something that they do. So it is a no man's land when the state actually goes and does things like this.
I'm Nancy Anthracite. I'm a physician. One of the things that bothers me about that nobody's been talking about really here is that the governments are collecting this information. And why are we providing the federal government and state governments personal information like this? We talked about how in Germany things did not go well, and I know you'll think I'm nuts to even mention that. But we already know that the government uses surveillance data and all sorts of things that got exposed. Why are we sitting back and allowing all this to happen with our personal health information? For instance, for quality measures, it's going into CMS, into a federal database. California, all the rest of these places that are collecting all this quality measure, it's personally identified. It's all about you, and do you really want them to have all that information?
I would just add one thing to that, and that is, it's not just the government. I mean, granted, the difference between a corporation, Google knowing everything about me, and the government knowing everything about me is that the government can't take away my liberty. They can put me in jail. The most a company can do is make me go bankrupt. But one of the things we found at 9/11 was a shift. Data that the companies had that the government couldn't get, we just saw the government purchase it. And so in some way, the All Payers databases kind of start to look that way, because really it's a public-private partnership, most of them. And some of them are just downright private, but some of them are public-private partnerships. And so they sort of remind you of that.
Right, exactly. And it's the government that's also facilitating and allowing a lot of this data collection that's going on with private companies. The wellness thing that I think probably a lot of you had to fill out some very personal questionnaires was a part of the Affordable Care Act, making a HIPAA exception. Now, we already know HIPAA, you can drive a truck through, it's practically useless, but then they made an exception to it, and that data isn't even all protected by HIPAA itself. And when you go to HHS and talk to the Civil Rights Division, they'll tell you they're helpless to do anything about it because HIPAA is so useless.
Okay. Well, I hope you'll join me in giving Chris another round for his reward for it.
Thank you, Chris. It's really wonderful to be able to have a Texan up here on the stage. He's like he is a Spider-Man hero, just like LaTanya, and he's from my state. So anyway, thank you. And next year will be good. We'll have you back again. We'll learn more. So and I hope everybody's coming to the gala tonight, and Chris will get an actual award as well. So thank you very much. And
Thank you.
and
Like
Professor.
laptop?
No.
No.
You can
Just don't take the data off of it.
Of course you can.
No,
Of course you can.
I don't know what the next speaker is.
Oh, Professor Ajunwa? There she is. Okay. Can't see always.
Do you need a laptop or you're good? I don't need a laptop. Okay.
Okay,
So we'll
that's
take
good.
it off.
So some of you may remember her from last year, and some of you have seen her amazing writing, and she is actually kind of at a frontier edge of health in